Well, Ulrich, thank you so much for that presentation. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Just introduce myself again. As Stephen and Martin said, my name is Daisy McAndrew, and I'm so grateful that I'll be chairing today's and tomorrow's sessions. So a very, very big thank you to Ulrich for kicking us off there. Lots of food for thought, I think you'll agree. Particularly, we're now in our next panel session going to be picking up and digging a bit deeper into some of those issues that Ulrich touched on. And I'm particularly grateful that Ulrich's going to stay with us to join the next panel. The next panel is being chaired by Marcello Topa, so I'm going to hand over to him now, who's going to introduce his other panelists and guide that panel. And of course, please do remember to send some questions on Slido and any thoughts you have during the presentations or the moderators panel. But for now, I'm handing over to Marcello.
Thank you, Daisy. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to AFME for organizing this event and inviting all of us. You can see the esteemed group of panelists that we have today. So let's just going by order in the, as you can see them on the slide, on the screen, Corentin Pulvec-Ledier from LCH, Gilza Benda from Banco New York Mellon, Jesus Benito in I think Banco New York Mellon is wrong. It's either clear, BME. And Ulrich Binzeil, we already saw him from the ECB. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this panel. We heard a very good introduction speech by Ulrich talking about the target services as one of the main infrastructures of Europe. He already mentioned all of the topics that we have prepared for today: target services, the collateral management harmonization. Then we'll talk about a bit of operational resilience, and finally about the new initiative on debt issuance market. Starting with the first one on target services. Of course, target services includes Target 2 and Target 2 securities, the two parts of cash clearing and securities settlements. How are we progressing? How is this market? How are they functioning? Maybe Jesus, you could kick us off on, as you are one of the key users of T2S as a CSD for your market. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the T2S experience.
Well, thank you, Marcello, and thank you, of course, first of all, AFME, for inviting me once again to this. Again, I'm not from Bank of New York Mellon. I'm from Iberclear BME Group. Well, I think definitely, all in all, generally speaking, T2S is working well. I think these days, actually, we have achieved the third year in full operation with all the CSDs. The last migration wave was September 2017. And obviously, we have suffered some incidents, definitely some important incidents in some cases, and we will speak a little bit later on. But all in all, I think that the platform is stable. The cooperation and collaboration among the ECB as operator and the CSDs and the clients of the CSDs, I think, is going well. In the group, which is the T2S CSD steering group, I think we discuss and we're steering the working day and the future of the platform very well. And I believe the overall impression that I have is that on the working and operational perspective, generally speaking, from my point of view, is positive.
Thank you, Jesus. And Gesa, from your perspective, how would you reckon the performance of the target services, also including all of the functionalities that ECB is preparing? Are these services addressing the needs of the industry, or is there anything missing?
I mean, taking the view both, so to say, from as BNY Mellon, we obviously have been, so to say, very kind of integrated into the T2S project, and we are also running kind of a global clearing business. So taking a bit of the user view, but then also the collateral manager view to it, right? So from the user's perspective, I think also looking back 1 or 2 years, we've had panels, so to say, more shortly after the introduction of T2S. And I think then the feedback was still a little bit, so to say, still observing the efficiencies that T2S brings. And I think this has kind of changed year over year now, because it also obviously took time for, so to say, the big users in T2S to adjust their behavior and to really leverage all of what has been made available to the market. And so I think this is really seeing an uptick, and that's a positive trend there. From a collateral management perspective, and so to say, as one of the largest tri-party agents in Europe, it's interesting for what we are observing there. And I think that also shows a little bit still the fragmentation of the market that we have, because we are still, even though we have opened up our direct T2S links where we are a direct member in a number of markets, we are not seeing the collateral coming in at the local market level. We are still seeing the significant amount of collateral that we have in our tri-party program coming in through the ICSDs. And I think that still talks a little bit to the issues that a number of market participants might still have, that there is still this fragmentation between, so to say, the kind of settlement side of things. And for that purpose, T2S works very, very efficient, and it's fully integrated, yeah. And then kind of mobilizing the assets into the collateral world, which is to a large extent obviously also kind of offered through tri-party agents. And there seems to be still, so to say, issues in the behavior, and that obviously then results in liquidity issues that clients would have, right? Because there is not enough, so to say, adoption of using T2S to also mobilize the collateral. And that's a concern that we are still kind of discussing with a number of clients. And I'm seeing Corentin nodding. She might be able also to kind of jump into that topic there.
Yeah, so Corentin, I think the point of having a fluid movement of securities is particularly important for a CCP, of course, across the entire infrastructure chain of actors. But from your perspective, as a central clearing counterparty, how is T2S European market structure of target services functioning?
Thanks, Marcelo. So I would be looking at that from the point of view of a Eurozone-based open access CCP, right? And that's important to start from this, because as an open access CCP, and I was mentioning in the introduction, I run the fixed income service for LCH based in Paris, and we do that with an open access setup. So what it means is, once we offer a consolidated clearing pool, we remain completely agnostic as to which trading venue, and in our context here, which settlement location members want to use. So we're connected to international CSD world, but also T2S and a variety of CSDs underneath. It's a good position to see the trend, which is your question, Marcelo. So I would say from what we see, success of T2S, good and bad, and I'll start with the bad, if you allow me. What might be a little bit disappointing at that stage is the stats. Gaze have touched on that, but the share of volumes that we see settling in T2S versus the share of volumes that we see settling in international CSDs hasn't really changed for the last year and a half. It's flattish and sometimes even declining a little bit. I'll give you a concrete example, which is a German debt that we clear. And for German debt, you have options to settle in both worlds. And there, pre-consolidation of LCH Euro repos in Paris, you had around 5% of the German debt settling in T2S. Post-consolidation, we moved to 25%. It's a great success. But if you take a picture at the end of August, we are closer to 22, 23%. So fairly stable, declining a little bit. Why? Geza once again touched on that. Same issues always, still way too complex for European banks. I'm not even mentioning international banks like the Japanese, the Canadian, the Australians we have. They're very convinced by the concept of settling in central bank money. They want to go there. But from their perspective, it's still extremely complex to understand T2 versus T2S, difference of messaging formats, auto-borrow programs, which are available in international CSDs, but not in CSDs, settlement windows. That remains extremely complex for them. On the bright side of it, we see more demand, clearly. I would tend to say that I probably have 2 to 3 member banks reaching out to us every week, wanting to move more to T2S, wanting to connect to new CSDs, wanting those CSDs to extend their offering to new debts. I mean, Jesus is here, so I can just mention that, but we're going to be offering French and German debt with Iberclear in the weeks to come. went public with Spanish data in Euroclear France, and we will be supporting Belgian and French data in ClearStream Frankfurt. So this is the market direction. They want to go there. But for us to support that, I'd like to flag that we're encountering many hurdles in getting the regulatory approval for those connections. So it's almost like there's a disconnect between the European project, where we want to help, and the market wants to go there, but still operational complexities and regulatory difficulties to get connections done.
So it sounds like there is a lot of efficiency, but also at the same time a lot of complexity and still some not very efficient integration of the services. I think Ulrich was mentioning very much about these points. So it sounds like there is still a lot more to be done, Ulrich, and this is probably coming from ECMS and the SCORE harmonization standards that you mentioned, or do you see that there is more that needs to be done by the industry and by ECB?
Well, Marcello, I think what you mentioned is a lot that will happen over the next 3 years. And in addition, I think, as has been mentioned by both Gesa and Corentin, it's a matter maybe of clients, of the markets still learning and getting into it. At the end, I think with the further harmonization work, and our policies, which strengthen T2S use over time, I think it will come. Yeah, so it's a long-term process. It's a big change, but I think a lot is in the pipeline that will further support this process. Where at the end, of course, the clients also have to learn, but it's being facilitated to the clients also through harmonization. Let's say the things to learn, to understand, decline over time if you standardize. So we would say a lot is in the pipeline, and that should make a difference. And if not, of course, we are always open to identify further things we can do.
Thank you, Ulrich. And maybe we can ask again Gesa and Corentin to talk about their view as users of the platform and as integrated members and participants in the entire structure of the post-trade services. How do you see ECMS and the efforts of harmonization on collateral management? How are they assisting the industry? Will they bring the desired benefits that we are expecting? Gesa.
I might be a little bit biased because I'm also the chair of the Collateral Harmonization Task Force for Europe. So that in itself probably signals that I stand very much behind this project. And I kind of took it as a chance for the industry really kind of to use the ECB's implementation of ECMS as a chance also for us as a collateral industry to achieve further harmonization. And I think the SCORE standards will do that. Yeah, we focused on different standards. Obviously, there's a lot of standards around the tri-party collateral management side. I can tell from my own experience, as we are now going into the implementation side as a tri-party agent, it does bring harmonization, because even though there was sufficient kind of use of 15022 in the past, and also tri-party kind of works similar in most of the tri-party agents, the devil is in the detail, and we have seen that we have different behavior for the same kind of workflow in different tri-party agents. And so I really believe that will help kind of users, and also kind of, to Corentin's points, also kind of probably non-European users, yeah, to kind of more efficiently connect into our market, because they can kind of, with the same standard, they can reach several tri-party agents, and that helps us, so to say, as a European market. So I strongly stand behind it. Then there was massive work in corporate action standards and all of the CSDs, Jesus, I mean, that has been a massive, so to say, work also kind of from all of the CSDs, or yet to come, evolved. I think it's also just a natural, so to say, addition to what has started with T2S. We are just trying to clarify corporate action standards better also for the use of collateral purposes. And obviously, if we are then able to crack some of the issues that we have from a taxation perspective in Europe, we know that there are also jurisdictional barriers, but if we are able to get into this, that creates real kind of opportunities to create liquidity for our market. So I stand behind this project. We have to observe, Ulrich, where we are going from a timeline perspective. There are pros and cons to kind of moving out the timeline in line with ECMS or trying to push the standards. That decision is yet to come. But overall, I think it's a positive signal for our CMU goal.
Thank you, Geza. And so before passing to Florentine, maybe we can launch the first polling question to the audience, which is on collateral management and the score market standards. There is obviously no time for everybody to explain and go into the details of these standards, but we assume that everybody will have in the audience will have seen and we understand what we're talking about. So while we leave that, Florentine, maybe your views about the perspective of this from again from the CCP perspective, please.
Yes, thanks, Marcello. So sitting in the middle, as we usually say as the CCP, what we see from the market, and I'm sure no one from the panel will contradict this, is the market doesn't like complexity, it doesn't like slowness, it doesn't like fragmentation, and it doesn't like changes of rules. The difficulty we collectively have is because of the environment, the diversity of the European environment, and the ambition of those programs, which we fully support. We tend to impose all of those characteristics onto the market. And when that happens, of course, coming at it from a private sector firm, you're always a little bit concerned about competitiveness. And being ever increasingly competitive requires you to be in a competitive environment. We need to be competitive, as in we need to have scale, simplicity, and velocity. We need to be international. People need to understand our role to join us. And we need to be able to scale up. And that requires indeed management and monitoring of collateral at EU level. So all of these are must do. So we would measure, in a way, the efficiency of those programs and initiatives against those objectives. They obviously all go to the right direction, and there's no doubt about that. T2, T2S, I really urge us to sort of get it done, even though it's incredibly complex, just because it's too subtle of a difference. It really needs to be streamlined. I mean, all non-Euro players, as I was saying, are having a really hard time getting their head around that. So there's a difficult yet quick win, I think, there to be implementing. ECMS is probably even more of a game changer from our CCP perspective. But if we could, it would have to go as far as allowing us real-time monitoring of collateral. And if I want to have the right strategy, I need to know where my members' collateral is going, how it's being substituted. Geza mentioned tri-party workflow. That's exactly what we need to get our eyes on in order to deploy the right services for collateral management. And I get to that in a minute. As to the collateral harmonization task force, I'm very biased as well because I know many members and they're quite smart. This task force is more than needed. I mentioned already in my first response the variety of issues around messaging settlement windows. I won't get back there, but what I would want to land there is the fact that these issues are very real. I mean, when you're a CCP, you see that every day. There are settlement failures on the repo market. It's costing a lot of money to participants. It's causing a lot of reputational damage to infrastructure sitting in the middle. We really have to move up and faster on this one. And SCORE, which I'm sure we'll touch on, I am biased then because you're asking a CCP whether we like a single rule book, so obviously we do. But jokes aside, I think SCORE focuses on the right thing. There are things that I like typically, which are, focus on cutoff flexibility, very important. Focus on tri-party workflow, as I mentioned. And finally, really not least, focus on non-Euro collateral, how we accept and manage that. So they all go to the right direction. Collateral is critical for a CCP because there is more and more volumes coming into clearing, especially at a time of crisis like COVID, which is completely fine. That's our role. We are risk managers. We are circuit breakers. But more volumes into clearing means more collateral requirements, and therefore the management behind it has to get increasingly sophisticated. So we support all of it. But just to bring comfort to all of you, we're not going to passively support it. We also play our role because we have a big role to play in developing our own services to support this environment. And there I'd land to 2 points which are important, I think, to show how we can play our role to humbly support the ECB in its journey. Clearly, it's widening the scope of collateral that can be deposited within the CCP. So we widened supranational agencies in 2018. We now accept green bonds, including the latest German issuance. We will stand ready to accept the upcoming bonds from the SURE program and Next Generation EU. And we'll also extend beyond euros. We'll offer next year Japanese government bonds, Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, European kronas, and a wider share of the US curve. That's really important to also attract participants and make all of us more competitive. And finally, it's not just the collateral you accept, it's how you accept it. And we also all have to get more sophisticated there to support your efforts. We went live with a pledge offering a few months ago, which is now having a nice uptake. But perhaps even more interesting for this panel and this audience, we will be live with a tri-party offering with Euroclear in a month's time, and that will be followed by Clearstream. So what I mean by that is, yes, we encourage all these very heavy, difficult structural changes, but we don't sit still. We are actually here to help, and we will develop what we can on our own as well.
Thank you, Corentin. We can see I think the results of the first polling question. We have if I'm not mistaken, we have a majority of respondents who are supporting the idea that there will be good benefits from the harmonization of the score standards, the implementation of these standards within the next 3 to 5 years. So, Jesus, how would you comment these results? Sounds like there is a lot of expectation by the industry about the positive impact on these results, on the implementation of these standards.
Oh, definitely. I think it is important to achieve as soon as possible this harmonization that will bring the CMS. Definitely, at the same time, we have been informed by the delays on this project that actually was a request from the market due to the crisis that we are living because of the pandemic situation. And I have to thank the ECB for open-minded attitude to listen to the market, because it was really necessary to have these postponements. So all in all, I think 3 to 5 years, we have seen it also with T2S. I mean, it's not that you are able to reap the benefits as from the very beginning, the first day, that something changing so dramatically as T2S or the ECMS in the future will happen, that you can achieve it. It's necessary to have time. It's necessary to educate the market. I really believe it's also a question of changing the procedures, changing things inside our homes, inside the clients, inside the market as a whole, and the market must be educated. And definitely, I think it's going to be positive, and I understand, and I agree with the results of the survey.
Thank you, Jesus. And so maybe we can come to the next point, which is on operational resilience. And with this, I would like to primarily ask Ulrich about some of the feedback. Also, there are a few Q&As, a few questions on the Slido system about stability of the system. I'm hearing some noise. I hope it's only me. Okay. So the question about recent stability in the T2 and T2S system, how can we address this? How can we ensure that the market is sufficiently well informed? Let's put also together the other question, the next question on communication to parties about all of these future issues. Ulrich.
Okay, I can say a few words. I mean, I can start with, the incidents again. So, there was in May, on 25th of May, was a T2S incident, and the origin was a settlement algorithm that was stuck, and then a manual action was taken, which then really triggered the problems where 2,000 settlement confirmation messages were not sent, and securities positions were erroneously debited, and that resulted then in negative balances. And of course, that was quite an incident. And of course, we took it seriously, and maybe on 5 dimensions, we have been working on measures to be taken. So first, there were several measures already implemented by the T2S operator to fix the software defects, let's say, that were uncovered at this occasion and were the root cause of the incident. So that was already done, and some operational tools to mitigate the impact of such situations were also improved. So second, let's say we acknowledged and we discussed that also with CSDs, with Jesus Group, that the existing tools and procedures need to be tested maybe more regularly with the involvement of all stakeholders, so as to speed up incident resolution in times. And that also includes, of course, communication. And here the operational manager group, the OMG, is also working on this with a special focus on information sharing and communication, so that this is even, let's say, more efficient and fast. And those things will be reflected, the changes will be reflected in the revised T2S manual of procedures that will be approved and go live in February 21. Then fourth, we have maybe more fundamental questions on system design that relate to the potential negative position and balances. So there we have established a task force that looks in depth into the architecture and relevant solutions to, let's say, prevent that from a deeper perspective, again relating to the architecture of T2S. And then the fifth element is that, of course, we are also in contact with overseers and security regulators who will very soon share their findings with us and will formulate recommendations. And of course, we will implement those recommendations coming from the overseer perspective and the regulators. Then we had in August a T2 incident indeed. I mean, here there was something, let's say, wrongly. There were maintenance work was carried out in parallel on 2 power supply units, which should not have been done. And that led to a power failure. And then the connected target 2 mainframe and IT systems. And then the operator rightly, performed the failover to the secondary operating site in order to restore operations. And this failover worked in principle, but then some, undiscovered incorrect network configurations on the failover site, led to, problems in functionality in T2, and therefore the longer, than necessary downtime of T2. And again, on this exercise, we are working. We are not as far as on the T2S one, so a full in-depth analysis is still being done. But we are also working on this and are of course committed to solve this. I mean, the one question is, of course, is that relating somehow to the teleworking environment we are still in? And I mean, the answer to this seems to be no. There's no direct connection, as you know, as other infrastructures. We have been working or operating fully in teleworking mode starting in March, and did so for a few months, and still are largely doing this. And this worked in principle fine. I mean, as you know, infrastructures, have to be prepared for the pandemic scenario. That's even foreseen by regulation. So we were prepared, and we are as proud as many others were that this worked perfectly fine. So the incidents seem not to be related. I mean, in T2S we also had the challenge that in the early weeks of the pandemic, we did not only telework, but we had unprecedented volumes set it in T2S. So the volumes, reached the double of what was normal, volumes never seen before, which led to a late closing. I mean, not to fundamental issues, but to a late closing in T2S for several weeks before the capacity was then adjusted. But this was overall a positive experience, I would still conclude, while of course the incidents were not a positive experience, and therefore we are doing everything to eliminate the root causes and are investing in this respect.
Thank you, Ulrich. And I see there is a question on Slido about how do we see that all of these issues, current issues or even future issues, are being communicated to all parties with intraday updates. I think this links well with a polling question that we had prepared for the audience, which essentially goes in the direction of how are the non-CSD actors, which are indirect members of or indirect participants of the CSDs and the T2S community, how are they informed? Are they well informed or not well informed about the status of T2S operations? I would like to, while the polling goes on this, I would like to hear the views of Jesus, and then also maybe Geza and Corentin, in terms of this type of communication flow and information about ongoing issues, about postmortems on past issues. So Jesus, maybe first.
Yeah, I know that there has been some sort of discussions on how the communication to the non-CSDs actors in T2S must be informed. First of all, I think the way the whole community is informed whenever there is an incident, it is very much established in the manual of operational procedures, in the rules and regulations that we all have agreed. And it is definitely very important to very much inform the market as soon as possible, but at the same time to inform with the high quality that it is possible at that time. And sometimes I understand, and I put on the shoes of the operators of the ECB, of the T2S, the ECB. It's not easy to have this balance at the same time. So definitely that's the first point that I would like to make. The second one is that I also heard that some participants in the CSDs wanted to have exactly the same information to all of them from the central point. I think, and I mentioned this before, do not forget we are CSDs and we are competing. We are competing each other. And definitely the client service support, the client service information that we deliver to the clients that we have, it's also very important for the CSDs. It's not only competing on price, it's also competing on the quality of our services. It's also competing on the information that we are passing. So definitely, I think that as far as I understand, most of the CSDs, we are trying to compete each other in order to give the best information whenever it is possible, within the rules and regulations that we all have established with fair competition. And I think if you probably think you are receiving late this information, is because before passing information, we have to be, first of all, sure of what we have to do, sure of the root causes of the problems, and sure of what we have to do in order to solve it. And in rush times, whenever there is an incident, you are under a lot of pressure. You should understand that this is sometimes difficult to be managed at the same time.
So maybe we go over to Geza while the polling goes on. Are you happy with the type of information and updates that you receive as a user of as a member of the T2S community?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, it's not directly in kind of my area of responsibility, but when we had this kind of issue, I mean, as a direct participant in major CSDs in Europe, we felt immediately informed, to be honest, right? I think it's a little bit also on us as a user on how are we maintaining our relationship to the CSDs where we are a direct participant. So I think that has worked well. there was, I think, a question, Marcello, in terms of do we require kind of a consolidation of market infrastructure for those harmonization efforts to really kind of kick in, right? And I mean, as always, right, there are pros and cons to it. And I can say that from the position of being kind of a sole provider of clearance and collateral kind of services in the US. And obviously that gives us the benefit of integrating items more tightly, obviously, right? But then I'm also European, and I think there's value in us having an open European market and having competition between CSDs, right? It's for the users to choose, right? Users can consolidate where they feel they need, so to say, this efficiency. They can then work with their preferred partners of kind of giving them the broadest access that they need. So I think this is just a matter of fact of our market infrastructure. We give the tools, but then it's for the users to kind of streamline their own setup. That's how I kind of would look at it as a European.
Thank you, Isa. Maybe Corentin, some words on this from your perspective. Is it, 100% efficiency is not possible, but where is the right balance from your perspective?
No, you're right, Marcelo. From our perspective, I'd have to say that we consider, and we're not the only one, that the overall European infrastructure has done really well during the COVID crisis, because Ulrich was mentioning that, but we've all received real unprecedented volumes. I mean, look at my service. We were dealing with 940 billion euros a day or more during the month of March. So that all comes to the CCB, that all goes to settlements. So I think overall, with frictions here and there and some failed levels that have been higher than we like, it's worked quite well. Now, more specifically from the T2S perspective, I think we are well informed when the incident is happening. To be fair, our operational teams get messages very, very quickly. Where perhaps we can be a little bit better collectively is on the follow-up. Because Jesus was mentioning the point that indeed when you're dealing with an incident, you're dealing with an incident. And coming from the CCP perspective, I'm not going to contradict that. So raising awareness that something's happening very quickly, but at that point in time, you might not be able to provide detail, I think is completely understandable from the market perspective. Perhaps best to say we will reconvene, or next round of information will be next day or 4 hours later, or depending on the nature of the issue, and be a little bit clearer on the follow-up. So that is the room for improvement that I would say.
Thank you, and we can see also the responses from the polling question that out of about 42 respondents, we have still a majority of people, almost 2/3, that either do not comment or they feel that they are not very well informed. So Ulrich, maybe just something that could be considered and maybe also going into the last point that we wanted to cover. Time is passing, so we are tight, but we wanted to briefly talk about the IMCG, which you also mentioned in your keynote speech. Essentially, do we need another infrastructure or in Europe for debt issuance, or maybe this is not a completely good description of what the IMCG goals are?
Yeah, thanks, Marcello. So first, on the information flows around the T2S incidents, we are working on this. And I think Jesus summarized it very well, that the principle has been that it goes via CSDs, and that, in principle, CSDs have all the incentives to provide here the best services to their clients, and that there is this challenge, to provide reliable information when, the incident is ongoing. But this being said, we are open to improve and to, as Corentin has said, maybe the follow-up information. So there's we are working on this. This is part of our follow-up work streams. And then on DIMCG, I mean, you put the question from the perspective: do we need a new infrastructure? And DIMCG is a step back, from this question. So that was the EDI question, if you want. We took a step back and go back to what are the issues and what are the indications that a private sector solution can help, and the role of harmonization, because there's a lot in the primary market on harmonization. I mean, this market is lagging far behind in this respect relative to secondary markets. So there's a lot of work to do on harmonization. Experience maybe shows that harmonization is not achievable so easily as an abstract concept where you just bring people together, but that, of course, infrastructures can be, game changers in terms of catalyzing real progress there. But okay, there's openness on this in the DIMCG. The DIMCG has 1 year to analyze all those questions. And again, we want to achieve here the best for efficiency and integration. And we are open-minded on the solutions.
Thank you, Ulrich. And we have only about 60 seconds left. Jesus, from your perspective, what is the opportunity? What is the future ahead of us with the IMCG?
Well, I think now we are following altogether the right way, which is looking for problems, analyzing the problems, and see what solutions we have to implement. And obviously, if there is in place private solutions, I would prefer to have this in place rather than private intervention. The ID presentation 2 years ago, I think from my perspective, honestly speaking, was a solution desperately looking for problems. And it was not the right way to do it. So I think we are on the right track now.
Thank you, Jesus. And our time is up as the numbers on the screen are flashing red. So I would like to thank you, first of all, Corentin, Geza, Jesus, and Ulrich for your participation, your open comments. Obviously, time is never enough to cover all of these points, but thank you all very much. Thank you for the polling questions, participation, and the Q&As that we have received from the audience. I will pass it back to Daisy and to the organizer for the continuation of the afternoon. Thank you all very much.
Well, Marcello, thank you very much. A really interesting panel discussion there. I'm sure you would agree. And I also would like to thank the audience for taking part in those polls and also sending questions through, as Marcello said. I think that last poll was really interesting, and I hope that Ulrich didn't feel he was being got at. I don't think he did. I think there was a really honest exchange of information and an admission that things haven't been great, and as he said, put it in words, something like it's a work in progress getting these things sorted out, and so many problems that he was so honest about. I felt really explaining both how problems within the system, but also, of course, the amount of volume and when COVID struck earlier this year, how that impacted their work. So lots and lots of really interesting information that I think was shared in that panel. So again, many, many thanks to Marcello and all his panelists. We're going to take a 20-minute break in just a moment or two. And as Marcello was saying, this sharing of information is so crucial. We hope that you can use this break that's coming up now both to network. As Stephen said at the beginning, there's information of how to network, particularly if you want to interact with our conference partners. We'd really encourage you to do that. Please go and stop in at the exhibition booths and come back to networking. If you select the categories and interests that you are particularly interested in your networking profile, I think you'll get much more out of the experience doing it that way. But as I said, we're going to have a 20-minute break now, and then afterwards we're going to be joined by Alan Cameron. See you in 20 minutes.